I felt the rain before I felt the pain. Cold drops hitting my bare shoulders through the gold sequins of my gown, soaking through to skin that had already learned to go numb. I'd left the charity gala 20 minutes early, taken the back exit, changed my route 3 times. Daniel still found me. You think leaving me was a choice? His voice came from the shadows first. That was always how it started. The voice before the hands, the warning before the storm. I kept walking. My heels clicked against the wet pavement faster now, and I told myself, don't run, Anita. Running only makes it worse. A rule I'd learned the hard way inside a marriage that looked perfect from every angle except the inside. Anita. One word. My name in his mouth like a leash, snapping taut. I stopped. Not because I wanted to. Because my body remembered things my mind was still trying to forget. He stepped under the flickering street lamp, and I cataloged him the way survivors catalog threats. Disheveled dark suit, jaw tight, eyes that had gone past anger into something colder and more deliberate. 3 months. 3 months of block numbers, of a new apartment he didn't have the address to, of smiling at coworkers while checking every parking lot before I walked to my car. 3 months, and here he was, standing between me and the end of the block like time had never passed at all. You don't just get to disappear on me. You know that, right? I opened my mouth. Nothing came. He closed the distance in 4 steps. You belong to me. The slap came so fast I didn't see it. I only felt the crack of it, a sound so sharp it cut through the rain. Or my head snapped sideways. The world tilted. I caught myself against a wet brick wall, one hand pressed to my cheek, and the heat spreading across my face felt like an answer to a question I never got to ask. The street was not empty. A couple stood frozen under an awning across the road, the woman gripping her partner's arm. A man in a delivery jacket slowed on the sidewalk, looked, then looked away, and kept walking. A taxi idled at the corner, and I could feel the driver watching through the glass, watching and waiting, the way people wait for something terrible to resolve itself without them. Daniel grabbed my wrist. We're going to finish this conversation somewhere private. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the rain, or the distant traffic, or the rattle of the city at midnight. A low purr of an engine, powerful and unhurried, the kind of engine that has never been rushed anywhere in its life. Headlights swept the wet street in a long, slow arc as a black limousine pulled to the curb. Daniel froze. I looked up. The door opened. He stepped out without urgency. A Korean man, somewhere in his 30s, dressed in a charcoal gray 3-piece suit, so precisely tailored it looked like it had been constructed around him rather than put on. The rain landed on his shoulders and he didn't acknowledge it. He didn't look at the sky. He didn't look at me. Not yet. He looked at Daniel. 2 more men in black emerged from either side of the vehicle, moving to positions with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this before, flanking, closing off the sidewalk, occupying space the way chess pieces occupy a board. It's not running, not threatening. Just there, suddenly and completely, where there had been nothing a moment before. The man in the charcoal suit reached up. Slowly, with 2 fingers, he adjusted his cufflink. Then he turned his eyes on Daniel, and when he spoke, his voice was low enough that the rain almost swallowed it. Almost, except somehow every word landed perfectly clear. Try that again. Daniel's grip loosened on my wrist without him seeming to decide to let go. I pulled free. I pressed myself against the brick wall, my hand still cupping my burning cheek, the red mark on my skin, the only bright thing on the whole dark street. The man in the suit still hadn't looked at me directly. He was watching Daniel the way someone watches a small, predictable thing they've already decided what to do with. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. "Who are you?" he finally managed. This doesn't concern you. Back off." The man in the suit said nothing. He simply took one step forward, just one. And the entire geometry of the street changed. Daniel stepped back without meaning to. 50 people had been inside that gala an hour ago, laughing and toasting with champagne, and not one of them was here now. This wet, empty block, this flickering light, this moment. And yet somehow one person had known exactly where I was. One person had shown up, not with panic, not with noise, but with the terrifying calm of someone who had already decided this ended differently. He finally looked at me then, just for a second. His eyes, dark, still, unreadable, moved from my face to my cheek, to the red mark Daniel had left there. Something shifted behind his expression, not rage, and something quieter than rage, and somehow more dangerous. Then he looked back at Daniel, and he reached for the front of his jacket with one hand. He unbuttoned it. Once? Slowly. Daniel took another step back. Everyone saw what Daniel had done. The couple under the awning, the delivery man who kept walking, the taxi idling at the corner, but only one person decided it couldn't continue. If you've ever wondered what happens when someone finally steps in, hit that like button and subscribe, and drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. You want to see what comes next? Daniel's mouth was doing something I'd never seen it do before. Nothing. No words, no threats, no that voice he reserved for moments when he wanted to remind me exactly how small he could make me feel. Just his jaw working silently, now opening and closing like a man who had rehearsed a very specific conversation and arrived to find all the furniture rearranged. The man in the charcoal suit waited. He was patient in the way that expensive things are patient, unhurried, certain of their own value, completely unbothered by the time it took for the rest of the world to catch up. Daniel found his voice somewhere around the third second. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," I said. It came out quieter than I meant it to, still pressed against the brick wall, my hand still cupping my cheek. But I said it. The man in the suit heard me. I saw the corner of his mouth move, not quite a reaction, just an acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge a data point that confirms something you already knew. "Ex-wife," he repeated. And the word in his voice had a finality to it that mine hadn't. He said it like a verdict. Daniel shifted his weight, and immediately one of the men in black, the one stationed closest to him, shifted too, not aggressively, not with any visible threat, just a mirrored adjustment, an echo, a reminder that every move Daniel made was being cataloged and answered. Daniel looked at the man, then at the other one, then at the limousine idling at the curb, its engine running with that low, indifferent purr, rain beating on its hood in perfect lines. "Tell your dogs to back up," Daniel said, but the bravado had the structural integrity of wet paper. "They're exactly where they should be. I'm going to call the police. You're welcome to." The man in the suit tilted his head, a fraction of a degree. "While you wait for them, I'd suggest you think carefully about what story you'd like to tell, given what they'll find when they run your name." Something crossed Daniel's face then. Fast, involuntary, the flash of a man who has many reasons to avoid official attention and has momentarily forgotten to hide it. His eyes cut sideways, then back. "What do you want? Right now?" The man in the suit looked at Daniel with the specific patience of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the other person to understand it. For you to take 3 steps back and put your hands where I can see them. That's all I want right now. Daniel did not move for a long moment. Then slowly, like a man conserving the illusion of choice, he took 3 steps back. The man in the suit finally turned to me fully, up close, and his face was sharper than it had looked from across the street, jaw precise, eyes very dark, the kind of stillness in his expression that comes not from having nothing to feel, but from having decided long ago that feeling was a private matter. He was not warm, but he was looking at me the way no one on this street had looked at me all night, like I was the part of the situation that mattered most. "Are you hurt?" The question was simple, direct. He asked it the way a person asks when they actually want the answer, not the answer that makes the conversation easier. I lowered my hand from my cheek. "I'm fine." His eyes moved to the mark on my face. He said nothing about the obvious gap between what I'd said and what he could see. "There's a car," he said. "You don't have to get in it, but you're welcome to. I don't know why I got in." That's not entirely true. I know exactly why. Because Daniel was standing 10 feet away, and the alternative was walking past him to get to a street that he knew as well as I did, in heels, in the rain, with a cheek that was beginning to swell. Because every cell in my body that had spent 3 months recalibrating to something that felt like safety was now screaming at me to put as much distance as possible between myself and the man who had just proven that distance meant nothing to him. But I also got in because of the way the man in the suit had said, "You don't have to." Like it was a genuine option. Like he understood that a woman who had just been grabbed and struck in the street might have complicated feelings about getting into a stranger's car, and he thought she deserved to make that call herself. And the interior of the limousine smelled like leather and something darker. Sandalwood maybe, or cedar. Quiet. Insulated from the rain in a way that felt almost aggressive, like the city outside was a problem the car had simply declined to participate in. I slid across the seat to the far side and sat with my back straight and my hands in my lap, gold sequins catching the low interior light. The man in the suit got in last. The door closed. The car moved. Daniel's face appeared in the window as we pulled away. Red, mouth open, shouting something that the glass and the rain and the soundproofing swallowed completely. He looked, from behind tinted glass, very small. I stared at him until he disappeared. The man in the suit was watching me, not intrusively. He was seated at an angle, enough space between us that it wasn't crowded, one arm resting along the door panel with the ease of someone entirely comfortable in the space he occupied. He didn't rush to fill the silence. Neither did I for a moment. Then, "Who are you?" "Min Soo," he said. I waited for a last name. None came. "And you just..." "What? Happened to be driving past?" Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite amusement. Something more controlled than amusement, but adjacent to it. "No." "Then what?" He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket. What he produced was not a weapon or a badge or a business card. It was a single folded document. Thick paper, the kind that costs more than it looks like it should. He held it out. I took it, unfolded it. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading. Columns of numbers, names I half recognized. Loan holders. Syndicate names I'd overheard in arguments I wasn't supposed to be part of. In years I spent trying to make a marriage work that was already rotten at the foundation. And at the top, in clean, formal language, the kind of language that lawyers use when they want something to be irrefutable. Transfer of debt obligation. Party, Daniel Reeves. The total at the bottom had too many zeros. "He owes you money?" I said. "He owes several people money," Min Soo said. "As of 72 hours ago, he owes it all to me." I looked up from the document. Why? Because 72 hours ago, I decided it was time. I set the paper down on the seat between us. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The city slid past outside. Wet streets, neon reflections, late-night crowds moving under awnings and umbrellas, the ordinary machinery of a Friday night continuing completely indifferent to what had just happened on that sidewalk. I pressed 2 fingers to my cheekbone and felt the tenderness radiating outward. The swelling had started. Daniel's debt, I said slowly, working through it, means you own his obligations, which means it means the contract he entered into with the people he borrowed from, the contract that included certain terms about you, now belongs to me. Min Soo said it carefully, the way you say something you've planned to say but are still choosing each word for. The air in the car changed temperature. What kind of terms about me? Silence. Not evasive. Measuring. Daniel borrowed money from people who collect unconventionally, he said. When he couldn't pay, he offered them leverage, information, access to things they could use against him if he defaulted further. You were listed as an asset. The word landed in my chest like something physical. An asset. His word. In his documentation. Not mine. I turned to look out the window because I needed somewhere to put my face that wasn't at him. Asset. 5 years of marriage. Of building a life with someone, and slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice. Watching that life become a trap. And somewhere in the paperwork of his failures, he had written my name under a column labeled Collateral. And now you own that contract, I said to the window. Yes, which means I'm your asset now. The car stopped at a light. Min Soo was quiet for long enough that I turned back to look at him. He was watching me with that same precise, unreadable attention. And when he spoke, his voice was measured and deliberate. It means Daniel can't touch that contract anymore. It means the people who were going to use it to get to him can't touch it either. It means it sits in my possession, inactive, until I decide otherwise. A pause. What you are is not determined by what Daniel wrote about you, not by him, not by me. It was either the most careful reassurance I'd ever heard or the most elegant threat. I genuinely could not tell which. That itself told me something important about the man sitting 3 feet away from me in a car that cost more than most people's apartments. Where are we going? I asked. Somewhere safe, he said, if that's acceptable to you. I thought about the alternatives. I thought about my apartment, which Daniel had demonstrated tonight meant nothing, because he would find me there too, eventually. And next time, there would be no limousine, no Min Soo, no document to redirect the danger. I thought about my sister in Philadelphia, who had a spare room and a husband and 2 kids, and a life I had no right to import this particular disaster into. For tonight, I said. For tonight, he agreed. The building had no signage. That was the first thing I noticed. A tower of glass and steel rising 40-something stories in a part of the city where buildings had names and plaques and lobbies designed to remind you how much everything cost. This one just existed, clean and anonymous. Its entrance a single set of doors, staffed by 2 men who nodded at Min Soo the way soldiers acknowledge a commanding officer. Not servile, respectful. There's a difference. Then the elevator opened directly into the penthouse. No hallway, no neighbors, no numbered door, just the elevator and then the space. I had a word for it eventually, standing in the entrance with my wet heels on pale stone floors. Considered. Every element had been chosen by someone who thought carefully about what they wanted a room to communicate. Dark wood, clean lines, a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that frame the city like an oil painting, rain-slicked streets 60 floors below, a million lights blurring in the wet air, the skyline laid out as if for inspection. A single lamp was on in the living area, low and warm. The kitchen beyond it was immaculate. It looked like a place where someone actually lived. That surprised me more than the size of it. A woman appeared from a side hallway, mid-50s, dark hair pinned back, and wearing a plain gray dress, carrying a folded towel and what looked like a first aid kit with the brisk efficiency of someone who had anticipated needing exactly this. "This is Mrs. Park," Min Soo said. "She'll get you whatever you need." Mrs. Park looked at my cheek without making a production of it, set the first aid kit on the kitchen counter, and said in accented but precise English, "Sit, please. Ice first." I sat. She pressed a wrapped ice pack to my face with practiced hands, and the cold was such an immediate relief that I had to concentrate on not reacting to it visibly, because I didn't want to fall apart in a stranger's penthouse while another stranger watched. Min Soo had moved to the windows. He stood with his back to the room, looking at the city below, his jacket on now, his hands in his pockets. Something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, the angle of his head, suggested he was not so much admiring the view as reporting to it. Processing. "The guest room is prepared," Mrs. Park told me quietly, so only I could hear. "You have everything you need, clothes, bathroom, whatever. You ask me." "Thank you," I said, and meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in several hours. She nodded once, patted my hand briefly, the most human gesture anyone had offered me all night, and disappeared back into the hallway. I held the ice pack to my face and looked at Min Soo's back and thought, what exactly have I walked into? I didn't sleep well, but I slept. The guest room was quiet in the particular way of high floors. No street noise, no sirens, no neighbors on the other side of a thin wall. Just rain against glass, softening as the night wore on, and the distant suggestion of a city that had no idea I was in it. When I woke up, gray morning light was pressing at the curtains. Mrs. Park had left clothes folded on the chair by the window. Simple things, dark trousers and a soft black top, my size within reasonable accuracy. I didn't ask how. I put them on and stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at my face. The swelling had gone down some. The mark remained. A bruise now, properly speaking, the kind that takes its time settling into all the colors it means to be. I pressed my fingers to it lightly. Evidence. The words surfaced unbidden. I found coffee in the kitchen, a full pot kept warm, and no Min Soo. The penthouse had the particular quality of an inhabited absence, signs of a person without the person, a jacket folded over a chair, when a phone face down on the kitchen counter, a coffee cup already rinsed, sitting in the drying rack. I stood at the window with my coffee and watched the city come back to life below. Taxis, morning commuters, a produce delivery truck double parked at a corner. Ordinary. The night before felt, from up here, like something that had happened in a different atmosphere. I started looking for a clock and found a hallway instead. The hallway led to what I first took to be an office. Bookshelves, a wide desk, a lamp. But as I stepped in and my eyes adjusted, I understood it was something more specific than an office. The desk held 2 laptops closed, one shelf of books, and on the other wall, not immediately visible from the doorway, which I suspect was deliberate, a series of folders, physical files, thick ones, labeled in a precise hand, a numbering system I didn't immediately understand. I should have walked away. I want to say that clearly. Everything in the etiquette of having been helped by someone told me to take my coffee back to the kitchen and wait. But my name was on the 3rd folder from the left. Not my married name, my name. Anita Graves. The name I'd filed my divorce papers under. The name I'd been trying to rebuild a life around for 8 months. I pulled it from the shelf and opened it on the desk. It was thick. Photographs. Some I recognized as public, taken at events or in daylight, but others were clearly surveillance images. Me leaving my office building. Me at the grocery store 3 blocks from my apartment. Me at a coffee shop on the corner of 5th, sitting across from my attorney. Dated, time-stamped, going back 11 months. My hands had gone cold around the coffee cup. Behind the photographs were documents, court records, the protective order I'd filed and then withdrawn because Daniel's attorney had made clear what contesting it would cost me in time and legal fees and emotional resources I didn't have. Medical records. a hospital visit I'd listed as a fall, another one, a police report that had been filed and then closed, things I had never shown anyone, things I hadn't known anyone could access. Behind those were documents about Daniel, financial records, syndicate affiliations, a timeline of debts that went back 4 years. 2 years before I'd filed for divorce. 1 year before I'd started to understand that the man I'd married was operating inside a world I hadn't been invited to see. Names highlighted in yellow, transactions circled in red, with the kind of careful, methodical documentation that takes time and resources and a very specific motivation. At the back of the folder was a single sheet, separate from the rest, a legal brief, half-drafted with a law firm's header at the top, a firm I recognized because I'd looked them up myself once, late at night, and immediately closed the tab when I saw their fees. This brief cited specific incidents, specific dates. It referenced the medical records and the police report and 3 other incidents I hadn't reported to anyone, incidents that had lived only in my own memory. Someone had built a case, not for me to see, not to show me, a real case, for a real proceeding, sitting in a folder in a hallway off the kitchen of a penthouse belonging to a man I'd met 6 hours ago. I was still standing there, the folder open on the desk. Oh, when I heard the elevator, I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, or as close to exactly as my hands, which had started to shake, would allow. I was back in the kitchen, coffee cup in hand by the time Min Soo came through the entrance hallway, his jacket off now, carrying a paper bag that smelled unmistakably like a bakery. He looked at me. A beat. "You slept," he said. "Some," I said. "Good." He set the bag on the counter. "There's food." I watched him move around the kitchen with the ease of ownership, not the performed ease of someone showing off a space, but the genuine ease of someone who knows where everything is because they put it there. He was in a dark shirt now, no tie, sleeves rolled to the forearm. In daylight he looked, not less dangerous exactly, but more dimensional. "How long have you known about me?" I asked. And he was opening a cabinet. He paused just briefly, then continued. "A while? How long is a while?" He turned, a plate in each hand, and looked at me with that calibrated steadiness. "Long enough to know what was happening to you. Long enough to decide it needed to stop. That's not a number." "No," he agreed, and set the plates down. I sat at the kitchen counter. He sat across from it, on the other side, and pushed a plate toward me. Pastry, fruit, nothing complicated. For a long moment we just sat, and the city moved below us, and the rain from last night had cleared and left everything washed and sharp in the morning light. "You built a case," I said. He looked at me. Not surprised, exactly. Reading the situation. "I found the folder," I said. "I'm sorry. My name was on it." He considered that for a moment. Then, "You don't have to be sorry. It has things in it I never told anyone." "I know. That should bother me more than it does." "Probably," he said. "Why?" I asked. "Just that. One word." The question that had been building since I'd opened the folder, since I'd seen the hospital records and the police report and the carefully drafted legal brief, why go to all that trouble? Why build a case for someone you've never spoken to? He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his coffee cup, then at me. "Because someone needed to," he said, "and the people who should have didn't." It was such a simple answer. No drama in it, no performance, just the flat-level acknowledgement of a wrong and a decision made about it. I couldn't tell if it infuriated me or undid me, and for a long moment I sat with both possibilities at once. "I'm not a project," I said. "No," he agreed immediately. "You're not. I'm not something to be managed." "I know. Then what am I to you?" He looked at me, and this time the steadiness in his face had something else underneath it. Something he was keeping very carefully in its correct place. "Someone who deserved better than what she got," he said. "That's all." I stayed 3 days before I tried to leave. That's longer than I'd meant to. But the first day, I was still processing the events of the night, and Mrs. Park kept finding small and effective ways to make me comfortable, and the penthouse was genuinely structurally peaceful in a way I hadn't felt anywhere in years. The second day, I had calls to make. My office, my attorney, my sister, who I told simply that I'd had an incident and was staying with a friend, and who I could tell didn't believe the friend part, but also knew better than to push. That the third day I woke up and thought, I need to go. Not because it wasn't safe, because it was too safe, and I had learned the hard way that safety provided by someone else came with architecture you didn't always get to inspect until you were already inside it. I packed my things, the small pile of them, since I hadn't come here with anything, and found Min Soo in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, reading something on his phone. I'm going home, I said. He looked up. He looked at the bag in my hand. He put his phone down. All right, he said. I waited. That's it? What else would there be? I don't know. A reason I shouldn't. He stood, moved to the counter, picked up his coffee. Do you have a reason you shouldn't? My apartment's address has been changed in Daniel's documentation to a false address, as of yesterday morning. I stared at him. How? It isn't important how. It is, actually. He looked at me over the rim of his cup. There are people who owe me favors. I called one in. The record of your current address that Daniel had access to now points to a building in the warehouse district that doesn't have residential units. I sat down slowly on one of the kitchen stools because my legs had made the executive decision to participate less. You did that in 3 days. 2 days. It took a day to confirm the correct channels. I put my bag down on the counter, not because I'd decided to stay. I hadn't. But because I needed both hands free to think properly. Min Soo, you can't manage my life like a logistics problem. I didn't manage your life, he said, with a patience that was beginning to feel specifically engineered. I removed one specific piece of information from one specific place where it posed a specific risk to you, without asking me. Would you have said yes if I'd asked? The honest answer was probably. The honest answer was that if he'd come to me 2 days ago and said, Daniel knows where you live and I can change that, I would have said yes faster than I'd said anything in recent memory. But that wasn't the point, and he had to know that wasn't the point. It's not about the answer, I said. It's about the asking. Something shifted in his expression. Subtle, but there. An adjustment. He set his cup down. You're right, he said. I blinked. What? You're right. I should have asked. No qualification, no but the circumstances. Just acknowledgement, clean and direct, which somehow made it harder to push against. I picked up my bag. I'm going home. I'll have someone drive you. I can get a cab. You can, he said. But I'd rather you didn't. I turned at the entryway. Is that a request or a requirement? He looked at me across the kitchen, and there was something in his face now that was less calculated and more honest, in the way that things are honest when they cost something to show. A request, he said. Everything I've offered you has been a request, Anita. You could have said no to the car. You could have said no to the room. I'm aware of that. I was aware of it too, and aware of what it meant that I hadn't, and aware that the man standing in the kitchen of a penthouse that cost more per month than my annual salary was looking at me with the closest thing to uncertainty I'd seen on his face in 3 days. A cab, I said, is fine. But I stood there for another moment before I left, and I thought about the folder with my name on it, and the case that nobody had asked me to file, and the address quietly rerouted, so a man who had found me on a rainy street couldn't find me again the same way. I thought about all of it, and what it cost to call it simply protection, and what it cost to call it something else. The elevator came. I got in. The doors closed, and I watched the penthouse recede through the narrowing gap, and Min Soo stood exactly where I'd left him. Not watching the door, not moving, just standing in his kitchen with his coffee, looking at the place I'd been. The lobby was bright and ordinary. The city was outside, washed clean from the rain, going about its business. My phone buzzed as I stepped through the front doors, a text from a number I didn't have saved. The address correction will hold. Be careful. When I stood on the sidewalk in the morning sun and read it twice. Then I put my phone in my pocket and started walking, because I was a woman who had survived worse than this, and I was still the one choosing the direction. For now, that was enough. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday, not to my phone, to my office, slipped inside a manila envelope with my name typed on the front, no return address, left on my desk between 8 and 9 in the morning during the 30 minutes I spent in a meeting on another floor. A photograph of me, taken from across the street, leaving the building with the no-name lobby, taken the morning I'd left, and written on the back, in Daniel's handwriting, 4 words I recognized from the last year of our marriage. You can't hide forever. I stood holding it for a long time. Then I called the number I hadn't saved. Min Soo answered on the second ring, and I could tell from the ambient quiet that he was already somewhere contained and private. He sent something to my office, I said. A photo. He was watching when I left. A pause. Not surprised. Processing. Are you at the office now? Yes. Stay there. Don't go to your apartment tonight. Min Soo. I'm not telling you what to do, he said, and I could hear him making that distinction carefully. I'm telling you what I know about Daniel's current position and what it means for your proximity to places he expects you to be. What you do with that is your decision. I looked at the photograph, at my own face caught mid-step on a morning I'd thought was ordinary. How did he get through? I asked. The address was changed. You said... The address held, he said. He didn't find your apartment. He followed you from the building the morning you left, on foot, which means he'd been watching the building, not the address. A beat. That's my failure, not yours. He said it plainly. No performance of self-flagellation. Just a man acknowledging an error in his calculations with the same directness he applied to everything else. I found that, more than almost anything, difficult to argue with. I'll come to you, he said, or you can come here, or neither. I can place someone at a location of your choosing and you don't have to see me at all. Tell me what you want. I sat down at my desk. Outside my office window, the city carried on, ordinary and indifferent. I'll come to you, I said. I learned, over the following 2 weeks, that Min Soo operated on a principle of controlled information. You knew exactly what he wanted you to know. In the sequence he decided you should know it. And the architecture of that looked like transparency until you understood it was actually precision. He told me about Daniel's movements. He showed me, once, a map of confirmed sightings. The parking garage near my office, a bar 3 blocks from my sister's zip code that made my stomach drop until he confirmed she hadn't been contacted. He was keeping me informed. He was also, I understood, keeping me close. I was aware of the gilded cage. I had not forgotten. But Daniel had sent a photograph to my office. An awareness of a cage and the wisdom of leaving it are 2 different calculations, and I was still doing the math. It was Min Soo who brought up the gala. He mentioned it the way he mentioned most things, directly, without preamble, one evening when we were both in the kitchen, which had become, without either of us planning it, a place where we defaulted to proximity. He said there was an event, a gathering of people connected to the same world he operated in, the kind of event that had no public listing and an attendance list that would surprise most people who thought they understood how the city worked. He said it would be useful for her to attend. Useful for whom? I asked. For you, he said, and for me, and for the message it sends to the people Daniel has been talking to. I set down my cup. He's been talking to people. He's been shopping. Min Soo said, with a particular flatness that made the word sound worse than its ordinary meaning. Is it looking for someone willing to take on his debt in exchange for a service? There are interested parties. What service? He looked at me. He didn't say it. I understood. So you want to take me to a room full of criminals to show them I'm yours. I want to take you to a room full of people who will understand the implications of your presence beside me, he said. There's a distinction. Is there? Yes. He didn't look away. You would go as yourself, not as a possession. The message isn't that you belong to me. The message is that touching you carries a cost no one in that room is willing to pay. I thought about it for longer than either of us pretended I needed to, and if I say no, then I find another way. Simple. No pressure in it. I want a dress, I said. Not something you choose. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Yeah, but the ghost of one. There's an account Mrs. Park can give you access to. I'll use my own money. Of course, he said. The venue was a converted shipping warehouse on the edge of the financial district, which would have been unremarkable from the street if not for the cars. A row of black vehicles that cost more than most buildings on the block, attended by drivers who stood with their hands in front of them and their eyes on everything. Inside, the space had been transformed into something that occupied the specific aesthetic territory between luxury and threat. Dark walls, low lighting, round tables set with crystal and white linen, a string quartet in the corner, playing something European and precise. I wore burgundy, my own choice, my own money. Won a dress I'd bought that afternoon with the particular satisfaction of a woman making a decision no one had made for her. I wore my hair down. I wore my own face, including the bruise that had faded to something a careful choice of lighting would hide, which I did not bother hiding. Min Soo was in black tie. He met me at the car door and offered his arm, and I took it, and we walked in together, and the room did something I'd felt only in physics. A shift in pressure, subtle and systemic, as information passed from person to person, the way it does in rooms where information is currency. He introduced me to no one by any significant title. He said my name and let it sit in the air, and people who were introduced to me treated me with a specific calibrated deference that I understood was not for my benefit, but for his, and it also understood had real practical implications regardless of its source. We were 2 hours in when I felt it. Not a sound, not a confrontation, just an absence. The slight adjustment in Min Soo's attention, a fraction of his focus redirecting somewhere over my left shoulder. He didn't move, didn't change his expression, but his hand, which had been resting with easy propriety at my back, became marginally more present. Then his phone, in his breast pocket, vibrated once. He reached for it smoothly, glanced at it, put it back. "I need to speak to someone," he said, in a voice designed to carry no further than my ear. "Stay with Park." I turned to find that Park, not Mrs. Park, a different Park, or a young man in a black suit who had been existing quietly on the periphery of the evening without me consciously registering him, had materialized at my elbow with the practiced invisibility of someone very good at his job. Min Soo moved across the room with his usual unhurried authority, and I watched him go, and the back of my neck was doing something it had learned to do in the last years of my marriage. That low, animal frequency of wrongness. I found out later what the message said. What it told me then, standing in a room full of people who trafficked in dangerous things, was that the distance between a gilded cage and genuine danger was smaller than I'd been calculating. They found me in the coat room. 3 minutes, maybe 4, after Min Soo left. 2 men I hadn't seen during the evening, which meant they hadn't come through the front. Service entrance, Park would tell me afterward, a failure in the perimeter that had been anticipated and exploited with a precision that told you someone had provided interior information. They were not rough about it, which was almost worse than if they had been. One of them said, in a reasonable tone, that there was a car outside and I should come with them, and the other one was already between me and the door. I thought about screaming. The string quartet was playing something with sustained cello notes, and the room was loud enough with conversation that a scream would have to compete, and both men had the calibrated patience of people who had already modeled that option. I went with them. The car smelled like cigarettes and something chemical. The drive was 20 minutes, maybe less. I counted intersections until I lost track, until the city thinned out and the lights changed quality, until I could hear water, the docks, the industrial edge of the city that operates on a different schedule than the rest of it, that runs at night with containers and manifests and arrangements that don't show up in official records. Daniel was there when they brought me out. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. 3 weeks of whatever desperation looks like when it's running out of room. A man who had made a deal he probably already understood was bad and didn't have any other options left. His suit was wrong, badly pressed, and he had the particular energy of someone who has rehearsed this moment extensively and is now discovering the rehearsal didn't account for how it actually feels. "Anita," he said, like I'd arrived at a dinner party. I didn't say anything. There was a man nearby I didn't know, older, heavy-set, standing with the stillness of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in a space. Daniel's buyer, the interested party. I looked at him and understood from the way he looked back at me that to him I was purely transactional, which was somehow less frightening than Daniel, who had a history with me. "You should have stayed gone," Daniel said. "When you had the chance." "I was gone," I said. "You kept finding me." "Because you're mine," said simply, like a fact of geography. "That's not how that works," I said, and was surprised by how steady my voice was. The older man checked his watch, said something quiet to the man beside him. The loading dock was lit by industrial overheads that turned everything the same flat color, when in the water was somewhere dark beyond the open bay doors, and the whole situation had the quality of an ending that hadn't decided its own shape yet. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker. A decision. All of them, simultaneously dropping the bay into black, and in the 3 seconds before anyone in the room processed what was happening, I heard doors. Multiple points of entry. Quiet, and the sound of movement that was not panicked, but was very fast. Someone grabbed my arm, not rough, directional, pulling me left and down, behind something solid and metal, and I went because it was better than staying still. The lights came back on 2 minutes later, or something close to 2 minutes. It felt longer. The older man was on the floor, zip-tied, phone gone, looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone recalculating their life. And 2 of his associates were similarly arranged nearby. Daniel was against the far wall, held there by one of Min Soo's men, with a forearm across his chest, and his face had finally done what I'd been watching it build toward for weeks. It had collapsed entirely into fear. Min Soo was standing in the center of the space in his black tie, jacket on, completely composed in the industrial light. He looked around the bay with the unhurried attention of a man inspecting something he owns. Then he looked at Daniel. "You used her name as Collateral," he said. "You listed her as an asset in a debt agreement. You sent a photograph to her workplace. And then tonight," he paused, "you brought her here?" Daniel said nothing. "I've been patient," Min Soo said, with a tone that made the word patient sound like the most dangerous thing in the room. "Well, because I thought you might understand, given time, the full weight of what you've placed against you. I've been generous in that interpretation." He tilted his head, barely. "It appears I overestimated your capacity for it." He looked at one of his men, and something passed between them without words, and the man nodded. "His documentation," Min Soo said, is now in the hands of 3 separate parties. 2 of them legal, 1 of them significantly less so. His assets, which he used as leverage against her, have been transferred, frozen, or otherwise made unavailable to him. He has nothing. He turned back to Daniel. Not a debt to bargain with, not an address to appear at, not a name to trade. A pause. Nothing. Daniel's mouth opened. "You can't. I already have," Min Soo said. "That's how this conversation is ending. Not with a threat, with a fact." I was outside when he found me, standing on the edge of the loading dock, looking at the water, which was black and calm and indifferent to everything that had just happened 30 feet behind me. He came to stand beside me, not close, a reasonable distance. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," I said, and then, "You were already on your way when they took me." "Yes." "The message on your phone. One of the perimeter was compromised. We knew within 4 minutes of it happening." I looked at the water. 4 minutes is a long time. "Yes," he said, "I know." We stood in silence. The city was aglow on the horizon, all that light held up by all those ordinary lives, none of which knew this dock existed. "What happens to him now?" I asked. "He faces the legal case, the one that's already been filed. Separately, the people he made agreements with tonight will want a conversation with him about his failure to deliver on those agreements." He paused. "He has many problems. None of them involve you." "And the legal case," I said. "The one in the folder, filed 3 days ago. There's an attorney who will contact you this week. You don't have to participate if you choose not to, but the evidence stands regardless." I turned to look at him then. He was in profile, looking at the same water, and in this light, outside the geometry of penthouse living rooms and black tie events, he looked not different. More honest, maybe. Whatever he was it completely. "You could have told me," I said, "about the case, about any of it. From the beginning." "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because you would have asked who gave me the right." He glanced at me, and I didn't have a good answer. "Do you have one now?" "No," he said. "I made a decision that wasn't mine to make. I'd make it again. Both of those things are true." I looked back at the water. A boat moved somewhere in the dark, lights blinking slow. "I'm not going to thank you," I said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm going to figure out the rest of it myself." "I know. But," I said, and paused, and chose the next words with the care they deserved. "I'm not walking away from this. I gestured vaguely at the space between us, which had been accumulating meaning for weeks, whatever this is. He looked at me then, and the steadiness in his face had something underneath it that he didn't, this time, keep entirely in its correct place. "Whatever it is," he said, "you're in it as an equal. That's not negotiable." "I know," I said, "so I already decided that." He almost smiled, the closest version of it I'd seen. It changed his face in a way that was worth waiting for. I turned from the water and faced the city. All that light, all that distance, all the ordinary machinery of a life I was going to walk back into differently than I'd left it. Beside me, Min Soo stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the same horizon, and for the first time in longer than I could accurately measure, I did not feel like a woman being followed. I felt like a woman who had stopped running. There's a difference. I was done explaining it to anyone who couldn't see it.